I will do my best to do this topic justice because I think it's actually a pretty cool program. So, I'm Liz Smith, I work for the North Dakota Forest Service. So, a little bit about me, I'm the Forest Stewardship Program Manager. So the way that our teams are kind of divided up at the North Dakota Forest Service, we have community forestry staff, we have staff that work at and run town or state nursery, we have state forest staff, we have fire managers, we have forest health staff, information and education, and who am I forgetting, Cody? Forest stewardship, and I think that's everybody, right? If I forgot anybody, I apologize, but forest stewardship is the foresters who work with private landowners, helping them manage their forest resources. And in North Dakota, that can be native forest resources or very often planted forest resources, windbreaks and shelter belts. So I also am a farmer and rancher in Stutsman County. So I am a customer of Stutsman County Soil Conservation District and a customer of the Jamestown NRCS office. And then the third, I guess, hat that I wear is the North Dakota Forest Service provides technical support for North Dakota NRCS for forestry topics. So that's what kind of brings, that's why I'm standing in front of you today instead of an NRCS employee. So like little asterisk, little caveat, I don't work for NRCS. I do not speak for NRCS. Anything you see on a slide or comes out of my mouth comes off of NRCS's website, off of their publicly, available information. So, just wanted to let you know that I don't speak on behalf of NRCS. North Dakota Forest Service is a advisor to NRCS. So, even though we're not on NDSU property today, I still would like to start out and just spend a little bit of time with NDSU's land acknowledgement. I do think it's nice for us to, regardless of our identity, I do think it's nice to sometimes just stop a minute and reflect on our place, in the history of this land and the history of North Dakota. So, what is conservation? Conservation is the protection, preservation, management, or restoration of natural environments and the ecological communities that inhabit them. And it's generally held to include the management of the human use of those natural resources, not only for current benefits for the public, as well as to maintain and improve the land with a long-term vision for the future and for sustainability. So I thought maybe it would kind of frame this conversation well to think about our mission statements. So the NRCS's mission statement to deliver conservation solutions so that agricultural producers can protect natural resources and feed a growing world. The and North Dakota Association of Soil Conservation Districts mission statement, which I'm sure you're quite familiar with, to provide for the conservation of the soil and soil resources of the state and for the control and prevention of soil erosion. And the mission of the North Dakota Forest Service, which I better read word for word because if I mess up, I might get in trouble for that. The mission of the NDSU, North Dakota Forest Service, is to care for, protect, and improve forest and natural resources to enhance the quality of life for present and future generations. And I promise that is the last slide I will read to you. But I wanted to just point out that two of these mission statements actually have the word conservation in them. And the North Dakota Forest Service mission, certainly we share that spirit of conservation about the needs of current North Dakotans and also protecting and improving those forest resources for future generations. And by forest resources, I'm also talking about windbreaks and shelter belts, little mini forests. So conservation practices then are like how do you do conservation? So conservation is sort of this goal or this theory or whatever, right? Conservation practices is how the conservation actually gets done on the ground. So practices are specific treatments. So they can be a structural treatment like a fence or a water tank, a high tunnel, any of those like physical structures. They can be a vegetative treatment like a grass buffer, a cover crop, a windbreak, or they can be a management technique. A conservation practice can be a management technique. Conservation tillage, no-till. variable rate fertilizer application, rotational grazing, so management practices. And those management practices, these conservation practices, are rarely done alone, right? They're usually like done in combination to meet a specific conservation need or a specific goal. And the standards and specifications are sort of the, I guess I don't wanna use the word rules, but standards and specifications guide how the practices are implemented. So a standard is scientifically based. It sets forth a minimum quality criteria that must be met during the application of the practice in order for it to achieve its intended purpose. And I don't actually know how to play this slide, but like, okay, imagine this is happening. Imagine this like screen on NRCS's website is scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling through like, I don't know, 100 to 200, I don't know, however many management practices NRCS has a standard for. So like everything from stream crossings to grass buffer, name, throw it out there. What are some standards? Riparian buffers, I'm familiar with like the forest ones, the tree ones, right? What's another standard?
Fencing.
Fencing standard, yes, absolutely. Water, there's probably like water.
There's wells.
Wells, yeah. So solar systems probably, yeah, like, yeah, anything, basically anything conservation-y has a practice standard for it. But the standard is not a standalone thing. The standard is developed by NRCS in Washington DC. It's the national standard. And the national standard is not intended to be implemented at the field level. It is not intended to be implemented at the local level. In fact, you're not supposed to implement it at the local level. It is supposed to be adopted, modified, nuanced, whatever needs to be done by the state and the local level for use in the local field offices in your local district. And the local interpretation of the national standard is what comes up when you're in EFOTOG and you put in North Dakota and you put in your practice standard. So the standard is usually just a couple of pages long. It talks about the, oh gosh, I gotta get my notes here. Okay, the standard says like where the practice it should be used and what problem it's intended to solve, and it does all that. But in EFOTOG, there's also like a ton of other reference documents. There's fact sheets, worksheets, like your Excel spreadsheet, your tree planting, you know, your NDCPA4 tree planting plan is something that you find in EFOTOG that supports the standard. Technical notes, statement of work, just like anything that NRCS has put together that assists in implementing the standard. That's what we call the specifications or the spec. So I'm sure you've heard somebody say, or you probably even said it yourself, that don't meet spec. Does that meet spec? I'm not sure if that meets spec. So when we're talking about the specs, we're talking about all those things, all of those fact sheets, worksheets, technical notes, and guidance documents that support the standard, that help us implement the practice locally. So the specific spec that I'm mostly going to talk about for the next 45 minutes. There's no clocking here. That's dangerous for me. Like you guys, okay. I'll just keep doing that. So specifically, I'm going to mostly talk about the 380 spec, because the 380 spec is the shelter belt establishment and renovation now. So as of January, the 650 spec, which was the windbreak renovation standard, the 650 is being absorbed basically into the 380. So now we will have one standard, we actually have one standard, that is the 380 standard, and it includes renovation as well as establishment. And it's to establish, enhance, or renovate windbreaks on all, or so these are linear or curvilinear tree plantings. On, this is the part that like gets me every time. On all lands except forest land, apply this practice to establish, enhance, or renovate windbreaks where rows of woody plants are desired and suited for the intended purpose. That's where you apply the 380 specs. What now? On all lands except forest land. Well, in North Dakota we have 43 million acres of not forest land. We have a lot of it. North Dakota is a grassland state. How many times have you heard North Dakota is a prairie state? Yeah, North Dakota is a prairie state. There is no denying that. Our climate, our soils, our topography, everything other than some specific areas that receive more moisture, drainages, upland places that get a little bit more rainfall, springs, you know, any place where there might be, where a tree could access moisture. And those would have been places where there would have been natural forest in North Dakota. That's absolutely true. Oh, the north slope of like a Coteau Hill, where the snow lays in longer in the spring and takes longer to melt, so the moisture has a chance to soak in. Those might be places where you would naturally find woody plants in North Dakota. But most of North Dakota would more naturally be suited to grassland. That doesn't mean we can't grow trees in North Dakota. Obviously we can. It just means that when we're thinking about applying the 380 standard, when we're thinking about doing this conservation practice, we just have to think a little harder. I don't want to say think a little harder. We have to use more tools to assist the landowner be successful, because we're asking North Dakota to do something that North Dakota is not naturally predisposed to do. I think of North Dakota as like, okay, I thought of this on my way over this morning. It's really dumb, but this is me, so. Okay, so I think of like North Dakota as like the queen or the king, like in all the fancy outfit, like sitting on the throne, right? And there's all of us with like our little tree planting plan, and we come in and we say, please, Queen North Dakota, can I do this? And Queen says, that's a slough. No, you will not have trees there. And then you come, okay, North Dakota, sorry. And then you come in and we're like, North Dakota, this landowner I'm working with, they just built their dream house and it's way up on this, and they have such a gorgeous view and they just really want to windbreak. Can we have trees there? And North Dakota's like, no, you shall not have trees there. So, I know, it's kind of dumb, but there are places, sorry. I don't know, I've like watched too much of that. I don't know. I just finished watching, okay, I'm not gonna get sidetracked by that. The Great. Has anybody watched The Great? Catherine the Great, I think it's on Netflix or Hulu or something like that. It's really good. But anyway, okay. So the point is, yeah, there are places that landowners, producers, people we work with, they want trees so bad. They want a windbreak so bad. They need a windbreak, right? And North Dakota's like, no. But there are lots of places that we can grow trees. We just have to use some extra tools to pick trees and woody shrubs that will work on those kinds of areas. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend a little video. It's like a 15-minute video that Peter Gogg, North Dakota Forest Services Forest Health Manager, he made a little 15-minute video on the challenges of growing trees in North Dakota. And if you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. It's on the Forestry Fridays YouTube page. It's really kind of enlightening for me to understand why it is so hard sometimes to get a windbreak to grow in North Dakota. So remember I had said that the spec isn't just the standard, it's also all of those supporting documents. So our North Dakota ePhotog, your local ePhotog, has all kinds of things. I mean, it has like purpose-driven designs, like a livestock windbreak versus a field windbreak versus a living snow fence versus a farmstead windbreak. And then of course all those other tree plantings that aren't even windbreaks, like wildlife tree plantings, riparian buffers, that kind of thing. But it has information on all those special things like fall leaf color and things like that, suckering habits, wildlife benefits, as well as care and maintenance and all of those kinds of things. All of these things are to help us provide assistance to the landowners to help them meet their goal. So the idea of a spec or a standard has been around for a really, really long time. The first specs actually were developed by the Mandan. What did it used to be called before it was the research laboratory? The Great Plains Field Station? Whatever, so the Mandan ARS station, Northern Great Plains Field Station. So it's been around since the early 1900s, and from 1916 to 1929, the Mandan station gave farmers in North Dakota, South Dakota, and eastern Montana bundles of trees, and they gave them a design for how to plant a windbreak. These are the kind of species that were in those bundles. Caragana, chokecherry, American plum, silver buffalo berry, American elm, green ash, Chinese elm. How many of you, fun fact, what a lot of people call Chinese elm in North Dakota is actually Siberian elm. Chinese elm turned out not to be hardy for North Dakota. So when you hear an old timer talking those damn Chinese elm, what they're talking about are the damn Siberian elm. But what they probably heard their grandfather cussing about the Chinese elm that died when they tried to plant them in North Dakota. Chinese elm hardy for South Dakota, and there might be, here and there you might still find a Chinese elm. But anyway, I got sidetracked. Scotch pine, jack pine, those kinds of things. So they had 4,000 farmers who applied to participate in this shelter belt program. And then in 1929, they went around and they interviewed the farmers and assessed the windbreaks to see which designs were working best. And that was basically the first spec. In 1929, they published the first, I don't know if it was the first one, but it was the first one I could find, the first windbreak specification for North Dakota. And we've pretty much, we've improved it over the years, but that was the basis of what we still use today. Some things have not changed at all. How to heal in a bundle of trees over winter, 1929, the most recent care and management, has not changed at all. There's no new technology for how to heal in a bundle of trees that is better than what we knew in 1929. Seems like we probably have come up with a few more ways how not to plant a tree, but a properly planted tree, like some of this stuff, carry trees in pail of water or wrapped in a wet sack. It hasn't changed, right? Some of this stuff, it was the best technology available in 1929, and in a lot of ways it's the best technology available today. But some of the things we really have improved. We really have gotten better at helping convince North Dakota to let us do this thing that we want to do. Suitability groups in 1929, uplands, terraces, low wet soils. And that was, like what I did there, that was to scale. Like that might be the difference out on the landscape between an upland, a terrace, and a low wet soil. I think I'm kidding. That is actually, like 2 feet? That might be it. Some parts of North Dakota, that might be about what it is. So the uplands and terraces were divided into sands, sandy loams, and fine textured soils. So we have 7 suitability groups in 1929. And then there was little things like keep the cottonwood off the dunes. Golden willow might be good where the water table is within 10 feet of the surface. Or Scotch pine, use experimentally until a good seed source is found. Well, today, what do we have today? We have CTSGs for Western North Dakota. I should stop here for a second. 1929, not positive if Western North Dakota would ever be able to successfully establish windbreaks. So that was to be applied like for the central North Dakota and east. Go ahead and give it a try in Western North Dakota, but just be warned, we're not positive that this is gonna work, but you can give it a try. So now we have East Dakota, West Dakota, 10 CTSGs. We have subgroups within the CTSGs. We have advice on cultivars and hybrids we can use. We have extra instruction, extra technology for scalp planting, no-till planting. I mean, things that would have been just absolutely unheard of from 1960 to 1929. So we have come a long way, but this is where we've come the furthest. I don't know how well you can see that in the back there, but you can hopefully at least see the two different colored fonts. So 1929, the results of that first shelter belt trial that Mandan Station did came up with 27 species recommended for North Dakota. And remember, maybe not western North Dakota, not positive. We now have closing in on 80 species. And I get it that they're not all approved for all sites, right? I get that that's not everywhere, but somewhere in North Dakota, we went from 27 to closing in on 80 different things that are recommended somewhere in North Dakota. How did we get there? How did we get from that in 1929 to where we are today? Data. Data is how we got there, because people tried. They tried, they tested, they evaluated over and over and over again. That's how it happened. I hope you can read those cartoons, because I was pretty proud of that one. So statisticians call trials, and they call the results of trials. In order to know if the results of your experiment are lucky or unlucky, is it repeatable? They talk about statistical significance. So the scientifically accepted standard is having a p-value or a, what do you call it? What is the word? What does p-value stand for? P-value, probability. The p-value is the probability that your data is an illusion. You don't want your data to be an illusion. You want the results of your experiment to be truly the results of your experiment and not an accident. So if you can get to a p-value of less than 5%, or 5% or less, that's kind of the scientific convention of something being statistically significant. So that means that there was enough replicated trials of those species from the previous slide. There was enough replicated trials of those species somewhere in North Dakota or on multiple different sites in North Dakota to have scientists, and NRCS is very science-based, these are scientists, decide that it was statistically very likely that if you were to install that species on that type of site, that you would have a successful win rate. Who is it who did all those trials? You may ask. I asked. This photo probably looks pretty familiar. The Bismarck Plant Material Center, NRCS, USDA, NRCS, Bismarck Plant Material Center is one of 27 plant material centers in the United States. They do trials. They evaluate plant materials. They do not only evaluate trees and shrubs, they also evaluate grasses and forbs and basically anything vegetative that might be used to solve a conservation problem. And our Bismarck PMC serves North Dakota, South Dakota, and pretty much eastern Minnesota, western Minnesota. And the Bismarck PMC operates through an agreement with the North Dakota Association of Soil Conservation Districts. And the PMC has been co-located with Lincoln Oaks Nursery since 1954. So long relationship in Bismarck and long relationship with Lincoln Oaks. The PMC develops reference materials such as, this is really hard to read, so I'm sorry about that. I promised I wouldn't read you a slide, but I read you that. Synthetic weed control fabric advantages and disadvantages. So PMC not only evaluates actual plant materials, but also some of these other technologies that improve establishment of plant materials, and puts out these handy dandy fact sheets for us. So the process of doing a trial is, it's long. It's a long process, especially for trees and shrubs, because it takes a long time for a tree or shrub to mature. So, but basically the way they do it is they assemble plants or seeds. So say, for example, this is a true example. Mongolian Scots pine. So it's a Scotch pine that originates from Mongolia, northern China. So like same latitude as North Dakota, very similar climate, very similar everything to North Dakota. They would have secured from probably researchers in China or Mongolia, like maybe, I don't know, 8, I'm just throwing out a number there, 8 different collections of Mongolian Scots pine. So somebody brings them seeds, they plant them at the Plant Materials Center, they evaluate them. From there, ones that look like they're gonna, like they show promise, are grown, little seedlings are grown out of those seeds and planted on off centers. And my next slide will show you where those off centers are. And then if it still looks promising at that point, they'll actually grow them out and send them to you guys to get them out in actual windbreaks. And have any of you had Plant Materials Centers trials? I know Betty has. Okay. Yep, Christina. So these trials start very controlled research conditions on the Plant Materials Center property. And then they very quickly get them out to the off centers to start evaluating them there. And then as soon as they start showing promise, get them out into windbreaks, get them out onto farms, test these plants and these trees and shrubs, grasses, forbs, other things as well. Get them tested in real life, get them out there, see what happens. If it gets to the point where it looks like this is a really significant improvement above what else is available or what used to be available, then they'll actually release it and it'll have a named release. And I have a slide that talks about some of those named releases. And I don't even know why I have my notes because I'm not even using it. Let me see if I can get the pointer to work. Offsite. Okay, so there's the plant. Do you think I had too much coffee? Okay. Plant Materials Center. Plant Materials Center in Bismarck. The offsites that are continuously being evaluated are there's one up in, off centers, one up in Botno, Dickinson, Sweetbriar Lake, Morton County, Sweetbriar Lake, Brookings, South Dakota, couple different, they're little green dots, and I should have realized it was gonna be hard to see them. But these little green circles, so those trials are planted at all of those off centers. So the same seed, whatever, collection is being grown at all those different places and evaluated at all the same time. And from the 1970s, basically, they actually established 4 additional trial sites in western North Dakota to keep trying to answer that question of what can we grow in western North Dakota? What's gonna work for West Dakota producers? Way up here in Williston, Dickinson, I don't know where that is, and sorry, did I just really offend somebody by not knowing where that is? Does anyone know where that is?
Henninger.
What do you think it is?
Henninger.
Maybe Henninger? We'll call it Henninger, and I apologize if it's not Henninger. Somewhere in that area. And down at Buffalo Gap, U.S. Forest Service property in southwestern South Dakota. So those are where those off centers are, where they're trialing all these materials. So some of the most recent trials, I didn't update this slide with 2021, but as of 2020, between the off centers and producer field plantings, these are the species that they're evaluating currently at the Bismarck PMC. So they have 58 plantings happening around this region, the North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota region. Doug fir, Canaan fir. Do you know what Canaan fir is? Canaan? Canaan? I can't even pronounce it right. Canaan fir, what is it? Some kind of a Christmas tree looking thing. Gray birch and northern white cedar are provided 3 conifers. I mean, we're listening, guys. I know this folks say all the time, more conifers, right? So they're trialing more conifers, and then a gray birch, which I believe, well, I'm not gonna make anything up. I'm making that stuff up. You guys are picking on it. So that's what they're currently trialing. So here's a list of the past trials that have been done since about 1950 when the PMC came around, and here's a list of things that have actually proven to be superior in one way or another, where it actually got to become a new release. These are gonna sound really familiar to you all. Centennial, Cotoneaster, McDermott, Usarian pear, McKinsey black chokeberry, Oahe hackberry, the prairie red hybrid plum. I mean, these are things that, legacy late lilac, right? I mean, these names are very familiar. These are selections of something, you know, whatever, like this is better than just a hackberry, or not better than just a hackberry, but proven for North Dakota, Oahe hackberry. So regardless of whether it was trialed in Brookings, South Dakota, or Dickinson, North Dakota, or, you know, wherever in Minnesota, that did well on those off-centers, so it was able to become a release. So now I made it dang near a half an hour without using the B word, variance. So what's a variance? A variance is, well, I thought it would be good to like just kind of look in the dictionary and just find out what does the word variance mean. So a variance is just like something different. I don't like the word inconsistent. Inconsistent has like a negative connotation to me. But when you just look at the root of the word variance, it's just something different. So then I looked up what are some synonyms for vary. What are we always preaching to producers? Diversity. Diversify your tree plantings. Diversify your windbreak. Diversify your farming operation. Diversify your income. Diversify your marketing strategy. Diversify. So when variance turns into the word diversify, that's when I start getting interested in variances. Basically, a conservation practice variance is just a producer-led field trial. So instead of it going from the PMC to the off-centers out to the producers, this starts at the producers. So these are producer-led field trials. And just like all these other field trials, it's about gathering data to see if there's a change that would be appropriate to be made to the practice standard, to the specs. Or it can prove that the guidance in the spec is correct, that this is, we tried it, maybe it's been a while since we tried it, we can't remember why it's not in the spec, but let's give it a shot. If it fails, then that would support not changing the spec. But mostly we're doing variances for the purpose of trying something new, to try to get something new or different, to get more diversity into our brings. So anything in the specs has the potential to be a variance. Anything in the spec has the potential to be varied from. And here's some examples of some real live variances that have been done in North Dakota. To use a 4-foot wide solid plastic film rather than 6-foot wide woven weed barrier to reduce girdling issues. That was an idea somebody had for a producer trial. There were some notes in that one. Curious if deer hooves would poke holes in the plastic, if that would be a problem with using plastic film. That was an approved variance. That was an experiment a producer wanted to do. That was approved. They did that experiment. I didn't look far enough to see what happened with that. Here's another variance. Normally we don't, I mean, there's nowhere in the spec that says, or that I've been able to find, maybe you guys can find it, where it says, if you don't like the site, bring in topsoil to change it. But what happened on this renovation was that when they removed the trees, so much of the topsoil got removed that all that was left was an eroded views. So they asked for a variance to bring in 12 inches of topsoil. That was an approved variance. Here's some variances that would kind of surprise me were even a variance. But to alternate Juneberry and plum in the same row, that at one time was doing alterations. You know, table 2, does this look familiar from the, I think that's in tree care and management. I'm not sure what document that's in, but at one time we didn't have that table. We didn't have guidance on how to alternate things in a row. So people said, well, some producer said, I'd like to try alternating June berry and plum in the same row and see what happens. I think it'll work. I think it will add diversity to my windbreak. I'd like to try it. That's an approved variance. To alternate amber, maple, and green ash in a field windbreak. At one time, that wasn't in the spec. We now have guidance on how to alternate things within a row. Currently, the spec says that you will not alternate a pine and this is the spruce line and this is the pine line. No, you will not alternate a pine and a spruce in a row. Well, that is an approved variance. I can't think of a reason not to alternate pine and, I mean, like with proper spacing, I can't think of a reason not to do that. I think I would kinda like to see more people try that, see what happens, but that was not NRCS talking, that was listening. So these are all things that people had an idea that they thought it might work better than what was currently in the spec, and they wanted to try it. And they did. So, I'm like seriously flipping these pages just for looks. I don't even know where I am. Okay. So here's the process for applying for a variance, and here's where I have to just repeat, I do not work for NRCS. The variance process is NRCS's process. It goes through NRCS staff. So the process is the same regardless of if it's a 380 variance or a grass variance or a fence variance or a watering facility variance or a whatever, any standard, any specification that a producer would like to try something they think will work better than is what is in the current guidance. The process is the same for all of them. Most every practice has like some kind of a design form, like so your CPA 4 tree planting plan, and that design form has like the landowner's name, has a map, has all of that information. So a lot of these required informations are already included on your planning document. But then you have to just write a little description of what specifically is being requested. And here's the part that's a little intimidating to people sometimes. Why, you have to just write a sentence. I mean, it's not like you don't have to write a big research paper on it, just a sentence. Why this variance request would work as well or better than what is currently permitted within the practice standard. And then this gets sent up to the NRCS state office to approve or deny the variance. So these are the actual steps. First of all, if you have a producer who wants to try something that they think, or maybe you and the producer together want to try something that is not currently in the spec. Oftentimes we're talking about a species that's not approved for a particular CTSG. First have a talk with your DC and your CDU supervisor. Remember, this is NRCS's process. Have a talk with them. Call me, call Cody, ask, hey, Liz, Cody, have you ever heard of somebody doing this? Do you think it would work? We'll tell you what we think. We're happy to tell you what we think. So then when you're kind of confident, you and your DC and your CDU supervisor, and you're pretty confident that this is gonna work, you definitely wanna try it with this producer. It's just basically an email to your resource conservationist. They send it up to the state office. The state office sends you back a email that says approved or denied. 99% are approved. They are not denied very often. If they're denied, there's a big, long justification basically that'll come along with the denial. So you'll know why it was denied. But that does not happen very often. Most of them are all approved. Yes?
If a species was listed on that list you showed earlier, prior tested, would that take away any possibility?
It just depends on which CTSG that it's approved for. So that list of 85 species, some of them are only approved for certain CTSGs. So give me an example of something that.
Western Holland is only approved for groups 7 through 10, so groups 1 through 6 are not suitable for Russian olive.
Yep.
That would be one.
That would be an
Where
example.
the
So just because Russian olive is on the approved species list doesn't mean it's approved by NRCS for all of the conservation tree and shrub
But
trees.
if, like, common nine bark was listed on that list that have been previously
Mhm.
tested, and they're not approved.
I'm gonna get to another slide, because there's a couple examples. Douglas fir, common nine bark, and honey locust were approved in 1929, and at some point over the last X number of years, they fell off the list. And I don't know why, you know? So, I have a couple slides here at the end that kind of gets that into that a little bit, so. But yeah, if you've got questions, feel free to interrupt me. So that's basically the process, and then this is the other part that's kind of intimidating to people, but I promise it's not as bad as it maybe initially sounds. Because these are essentially research experiments that we're doing, they just need to be checked on to see if they're working. So there's a little follow-up site visit in the first few years to see if the stuff is establishing, and then again in years 5, 10, 15, and 20. And you get a little reminder from the state office when you're due for that. It actually comes from the North Dakota Forest Service. We just offered to send out those reminders. So, this is how the actual site visit information is collected. There's a one-page worksheet, or there's an app. My friend Cody here. I said, Cody, do you think you can do something where people can just use their cell phone to do X, Y, and Z? And Cody goes, yeah, I think I can do that. So Cody made an app for doing variance checks. So it's basically just you stand out there, height, survival, vigor, weed control, snap a couple pictures, send. It takes longer to get there out to the site than it does to actually do the site check. So like I said, that intimidating part is, why will this work as well or better than what is currently permitted in the practice standard? Diversity. Alternate, diverge, differ, alter, fluctuate. You know, those are some words you might think of when you're thinking about that sort of justification for why we want to try this. Why is this better? Why is this as well? I mean, the bar isn't like that it has to outperform the standard as well or better than what is currently in the standard. Here's something that we did last winter, North Dakota Forest Service with some other folks, did sort of a dive through research information, and we came up with some things that we believe would do well, that we hope people will feel encouraged to try. Black chokeberry, Mackenzie black chokeberry, so yellow boxes are west, so the west part of the 20-year tree heights. Green boxes that are, I picked the wrong colors for the slideshow, for east. So Mackenzie black chokeberry on 1s, 2s, and 3s in West Dakota, and on 4s and 5s in eastern North Dakota. American linden on some sites in western common hackberry. Burrow, that McDermott Eucerian pear would be the release I would recommend to be tried as far as Herman Eucerian pear. Give them some tries on some of these 6s and 7s. Black walnut. I've heard anecdotes, and I've seen some of them with my own eyes. Black walnut in western North Dakota. Scotch pine on some more sites, Arnold hawthorn. And here's where some of those species that you were just asking about. Well, is nine bark on there? No. Huh. I don't know why that's not on there. Maybe we just couldn't find enough research information that I felt confident putting it on a slide. But honey locust. Honey locust is improved for lots of sites in South Dakota. And it was on the 1929 species list. Little leaf linden. I think there's been quite a bit of little leaf linden planted, not only in eastern North Dakota, but also western North Dakota. Not a ton of it had an actual variance applied for with the planting. So when there's no variance, sometimes they get forgotten about or they get lost track of. It doesn't mean they disappeared, it just means that whoever planted it doesn't remember planting it, or, you know, you can remember it for whatever reasons. Kentucky coffee tree is gonna be a little bit questionable for North Dakota, but we sure like to see it. I would like to see it on some sites in eastern North Dakota. And then of course, all of the conifers, you know, Myers spruce, Norway spruce, lodgepole pine, jack pine, Doug fir, Japanese elm. Japanese elm is an interesting elm. It has a little leaf like a Siberian elm. So if you think of usually American elm has like the big leaves like this, and Siberian elm has the little leaves that are about this big. Japanese elm has little leaves like a Siberian elm, but it hardly makes any seed at all. It's more like an American elm. So Japanese elm might be something that we could think about to try, you know, on some of those sites that maybe we just don't, you know, we don't want to put any more Siberian or American elm on them. Seems like it might be a little bit resistant to Dutch elm disease. I hate saying that, but resistant doesn't mean proof, right? Dutch elm disease resistant doesn't mean Dutch elm disease proof, but it's a different species. It's variety, getting variety out on the landscape. That is the end of my slides. So now I would love to try to answer any questions anybody has. If you get a chance, please visit the North Dakota Forest Service's website. The stewardship page of the North Dakota Forest Service's website tells you about all the things that my team has been up to. We also have our Forestry Fridays YouTube channel. Has anybody watched any of our videos? I'm excited for you to watch it. We have like 1,000 views on YouTube. I'm like YouTube big with that. Anyway, my kids are so proud of me. No, they're not proud of me. But anyway, there's a bunch of little short videos. They range from 15 minutes to maybe 19 minutes, different forestry topics. Well, I think they're worth it while you're eating your sandwich, just, you know, to let one play out over the lunch break or whatever. Questions, thoughts, ideas, criticisms, suggestions. Yes?
Do you ever think about doing any kind of program on collecting seed for trees?
What do you, okay, tell me what you're thinking.
Like town or nursery, like seed for the
Yep.
nursery?
Yep.
Any programs on that?
Like,
Did Dustin talk to you about maybe having a training this summer up there at Towner?
Dustin, yeah, we were talking about that a little bit. I think there's some real merit to that, just because I know some of the things that I hear from Jeff, who's the manager of Towner Nursery. He'll say things like, you know, that whatever it was, that Myers spruce or that Scotch pine or whatever it was, that is 3 miles away from the nursery. It's been so easy for us to get to it and collect for it. They're getting too tall. The cones are up too high. So in terms of finding seed source, I think there would be some merit in that. We should talk to Jeff and see what he thinks about something, like a training
Because a
on how
long
to
time ago, I
collect.
think you guys had one like the Dandy Forest where you're collecting seed and
Yep.
this is before my time,
Before my time too.
one of my NRCS employees had one for one. I thought that'd be something interesting.
Yeah, there's so much to it. I mean, there's like, you know, how to know if the seed is ripe. I mean, you can think about like, how do you know when to combine corn, or how do you know when to harvest wheat? You know, it has to go through all of its stages and everything, and you harvest it when it's ripe. Well, with tree seed, you have to harvest it at just that right time so that it'll be able to be a viable seed. So there's a little bit to it, but I would love to learn more about it myself. We should. Cody, let's remember to ask Jeff about some kind of like training on how to collect seed. Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts, ideas? Come on, I know you guys have questions. Either that or I covered everything. I know I didn't cover everything.
Well, I know with the variance, they do a lot of times to see what trees are growing there.
Yeah,
So I mean, a lot of yards, you know, some guy wants to plant lindens and the soil doesn't qualify it, where he's got silver maple growing there, so you know, lindens will probably do
yep.
fine.
So this is actually really good, to talk about, and, trying to decide whether I should say I do not speak on behalf of NRCS when I say this. Let's just assume I do not speak on behalf of NRCS when I say this, but I don't think they would be mad at me for saying it. You've gotta do a site evaluation, right? Because your soil map units contain many different soil types within a soil map unit. So all that tells you when you pull up the soil on Web Soil Survey is what is most likely to be in this soil map unit. It doesn't tell you exactly what is out on that site. It's like your clues as to what would potentially be out on that site. So you go out there on site, you got your soil map, and you're like, well, this is a G134B or whatever, right? And you go out there and you're like, I don't think that's what that is, cause it's, you know, it's a terrace, or it's a low spot, or it's a this or a that. You pull up all of those minor soils and you're like, pretty darn sure that this is one of the minor soils, so that you can collect evidence when you're out on site that will tell you which of your actual soils are on your site. There's, NRCS actually has a little field guide too for how to, actually go and dig a little soil pit and put some water on it and feel the soil, and it'll tell you, you know, it helps you key out what is actually there. Because a soil map unit might be a half a mile, well, they're probably not a half a mile wide, but could be several thousand feet. And your tree planting may only be 500 feet of that, you know? So, if you get out on site and you're like, there's no way this is a 6D, because I have 80-foot tall cottonwood growing on it. Then you pull up all your minor soils and you're like, well, yeah, I see that there's other minor, you know, soils on this map unit. So what you see with your own eyes when you're out on site is what refines sort of what Web Soil Survey tells you. So yeah, if there's other evidence on your site that leads you down a different path, like there's already whatever XYZ growing on this site. Now, the tricky part with this one though is, how far from the site is it growing? With a windbreak renovation, it's pretty, a little bit more intuitive, because if they're planting, you know, right where the old windbreak was, or next to the old windbreak, pretty sure you're on the same soil. But if it's like across the road at the neighbor's place, or on the other side of the quarter, is that really close enough to draw any conclusions from? So, but if it's growing on site, that's a really good, sometimes I look at like the herbaceous vegetation. If you have a spot where it goes from smooth brome to reed canary grass, pretty good indicator that you're getting into a soil change there. Yeah.
With your Forest Service program, though, renovation, we can get away with some of those determinations, but if you deviate from what the soil survey is telling you, for EQIP or any federal funds, you need a soil scientist to make that determination.
This is what I have heard from the state office, and I will tell you exactly word for word what I've heard. Anybody with some training can do a soil evaluation, with some training, okay? Doesn't actually have to be a soil scientist. So you can, anybody can, and that's what that field guide walks you through, is how to do a site evaluation. Did I contradict anything somebody else has been heard?
Will not allow that.
No, it is. It is, like, it really is.
That's what they told us, and then we do the soil test and they kick it back to us, oh, you guys aren't certified.
I have not heard of a certification, and as recently as 2 weeks ago, I heard the soil scientists from the state office say on a webinar with me, anybody with training can learn how to do this evaluation.
So it might be like, in the office where you get job approval, if you've gone to these trainings, and then they can check a box that say, okay, you are certified to do that.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a box or a certificate or what it is to get that training, I don't know. Does anybody know?
Yeah,
It
they
would
gotta
be-
have
it would
job
be great to know.
approval
You have job approval? You have to have job approval.
you have to have job approval. The NRCS staff has to have job approval.
What would be a question I can ask that can get us to, can I do this or not? What is a question I can ask, or how can I help with this? Because there's not a lot of soil scientists, I mean, they're busy, right?
Yeah, it takes a while to get up.
Yeah, so what is a question I could ask, like, what training should we have? What training do we need to have?
To compare, like, I can't go out and do a checkout on a fence because I don't have job approval for that. I have to take somebody from NRCS that
Okay.
has that.
Okay,
Basically, they gotta give you the kind of clearance where
Yeah.
your name's on this piece of
Okay.
paper approving the soil, they're gonna trust you,
so we just need to find out what needs to be done to have everybody be confident that if my name is on that, your name is on that, and so-and-so's name is on that. What kind of training, what does it mean by the training?
Yeah.
Okay, I can ask that question. I'm happy to ask that question. Any other? The variance process, I know it sounds a little, well, like, oh, that's more paperwork, but the way that I think of it is like, how else are we gonna get more species? How else are we gonna get more things unless we try it?
How long does it take to get one back?
They say 1 to 2 days as long as everybody's in the office.
And they gotta kinda take away that 20-year study, 20 years. is a lot.
You don't have to go out every year for 20 years.
No, I mean, as
Yeah.
far as when they're testing new trees.
And the reason is because usually it takes 20 years for a tree to get to maturity.
Yeah.
So they wanna be sure that it can make it from the day it goes in the ground until
Yeah, but
it's functional.
it makes 10 years.
That's really good
It's
evidence.
the long life.
In North Dakota sometimes. Yes,
I'd encourage anybody, when plant materials comes out with a list of trees that they're trying to get out in the field, to volunteer and take them and do the planting. Because everybody's always looking for something different or something more to put out there in your counties and stuff. And this is a great trial site opportunity for you to find out if such a species work. I've done pin cherry, I've done the black chokeberry, and I currently am doing the Douglas fir. So,
How does Plant Materials Center decide what variety of trees they're going to try and introduce?
requests from districts,
yep, they have an advisory council, just
Yeah.
like, other NRCS
you
entities.
get a bundle of 25 trees, they give you markers to put at the end of the 25 trees, beginning and the end, so you know where they're at. And, I mean, it's simple, it's easy, and it
And those
gets
are
the-
for 5 years. The plant materials trials are only checked for the first 5 years. If it's a variance, if you also do a variance, then we'll check it again at 10, 15, and 20. Yeah. Yes.
When you had said that 650 spec is being absorbed into the 380
Yes.
spec, is that new spec out, or is it still in the works?
The standard is out, so the new 380 standard was approved by North Dakota in January. There's a working group, NRCS working group, that is working on updating tree care and management, updating the 20-year tree height, updating everything so that, and your cons for workbook, or your tree planting workbook now has extra tabs because it's got renovation workbooks on it too. So they're working on it right now, and they wanna get it rolled out, so they're working on it right now.
Will they let us know when they're out?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. If the district doesn't get it themselves, your DC or the NRCS staff will get them, and just tell them that you'd be interested in trying a variety. And you can always find a producer in your county that's willing to, be the guinea pig for you.
So those last two slides that I showed that the colors didn't show up as well as I hoped they would. If you know of any plantings on those soil types in your district of those species that are currently growing and exist right now, I would really like to know about it.
Will you send us those slides?
Yeah, yeah. This is actually on our website. That list is actually on our website under, I don't remember which button. Stewardship in Action. I think it's under Stewardship in Action. New species for North Dakota woodlands. It's on our website, but I'll email it out too. So. Well, thanks for giving me your time. I guess I didn't put my own contact information. I didn't put my own contact information. But email me, call me. My contact info is on the website. Liz Smith. If you have any questions or. I will try to answer. Thank you.